On a stormy Chicago night, an elderly woman stood shivering under a broken umbrella, waiting for a bus that never came. A young black man, just off a 10-hour diner shift, took off his only good jacket, held it over her head, and helped her climb aboard. He thought it ended there. But the very next day, at a make-or-break job interview, he froze. Sitting across the table among the company's leaders was the very same woman he had sheltered in the rain. The October rain hit Chicago like punishment, turning Michigan Avenue into a river of brake lights and cursing cab drivers. Alex Carter pushed through the glass doors of Tony's Diner at 11:47 p.m., the smell of burnt coffee and old grease clinging to his uniform like a second skin. His shift supervisor barely looked up from counting the till as Alex untied his apron and hung it on the hook marked Carter in faded black marker. "Same time tomorrow," Tony called out, not bothering to lift his eyes from the cash register. "And don't be late again." Alex nodded, though he hadn't been late in 3 months. Some people saw what they expected to see, and Tony expected trouble from a guy with Alex's background. The fact that Alex had been Employee of the Month twice running didn't seem to register in Tony's accounting of the world. Outside, the wind drove the rain sideways, soaking through Alex's thin jacket before he had walked half a block. He pulled out his wallet and counted the damp bills by the glow of a streetlight. $43, enough for groceries or the electric bill. But not both. The decision would have to wait until he got back to his studio apartment, where programming textbooks sat stacked on a card table next to a laptop held together with electrical tape and hope. The walk home was 8 blocks through neighborhoods that told the story of Chicago's decline and resurrection. Broken windows and fresh paint, empty lots turned into community gardens, and old factories converted into condos Alex could never afford. He knew these streets by heart now, had walked them for 2 years since his release, had learned which corners to avoid, and which shop owners would meet his eyes without fear or suspicion. 3 blocks from the diner, he saw her, an elderly, white woman under the awning of a closed pharmacy, her silver hair plastered against her scalp, her coat darkened with water. She held the twisted remains of an umbrella, its black fabric hanging in tatters like the wings of a dead bird. Every few seconds, she glanced down the empty street, searching for headlights that never came. Alex slowed his pace. The smart move was to keep walking. He was already soaked, already exhausted from 10 hours of taking orders from customers who looked through him like furniture. But something about the way she stood there, so small and alone in the storm, made his chest tighten with recognition. He had been in that place before, waiting for help that might never come. He approached carefully, staying in her line of sight so she wouldn't be startled. In his experience, sudden movements from a tall black man in work clothes usually ended badly for everyone involved. "Ma'am?" His voice was gentle, respectful, pitched low under the sound of the rain. "You okay?" She looked up, and he could see her making rapid calculations behind sharp blue eyes, a stranger in the dark approaching her while she was vulnerable. Her fingers tightened on her purse strap, and Alex took a half step back, giving her space to feel safe. "The bus," she said finally, her voice thin against the storm. "It should have been here 20 minutes ago." Alex glanced at the bus. "Stop" sign. Its schedule faded and water-damaged. Night buses run slow when the weather's bad. Sometimes they skip stops if the roads are too flooded. She nodded, but her shoulders sagged with the weight of small disappointments accumulating. The broken umbrella, the missing bus, the rain that showed no signs of stopping. Alex recognized that posture. He had worn it himself on nights when the world seemed determined to push him down. Without thinking, he shrugged off his jacket. It was his only good jacket, the one he wore to job interviews and court appearances, anywhere he needed to look like someone worth taking seriously. The fabric was worn thin at the elbows, and the zipper caught sometimes, but it was clean, and it was his. "Here," he said, holding it over her head like a makeshift umbrella. "This will keep the worst of it off you." "Oh, I couldn't," she protested, but she didn't move away from the shelter he offered. "You'll get soaked." "Already am," Alex said, which was true enough. "Bus will be along soon." They stood together in the circle of dry space under his jacket, two strangers sharing silence while the storm raged around them. The woman glanced up at him several times, as if trying to solve a puzzle she hadn't expected to encounter at a bus stop in the rain. Alex kept his eyes on the street, watching for headlights, trying to ignore the cold water running down his back. When the bus finally appeared through the rain, its headlights cutting weak paths through the darkness, Alex helped her climb the steep steps. Her hand was small and cold in his, and she moved carefully, like someone who had learned not to trust her balance. At the door, she turned back toward him, her mouth opening as if to say something, but the bus driver was impatient. The rain was loud, and the hydraulic doors were already closing. The bus pulled away into the night, taking her warm and dry toward whatever home waited for her, and Alex was alone again, with the storm in his soaked shirt, and the growing certainty that he would be fighting off pneumonia for the next week. As he walked the remaining 5 blocks home, water squelching in his shoes with every step, something warm flickered in his chest, despite the cold. Some acts mattered, whether anyone remembered them or not. Maybe especially then. 3 days later, Alex stood in the shadow of the Vail Corporation Tower, rose 43 stories of glass and steel, reflecting the gray October sky like a mirror. Around Alex, men and women in $1,000 suits moved with the confident stride of people who belonged in buildings like this, their conversations about market shares and quarterly projections floating past him like smoke from a world he had never inhabited. His reflection stared back from the building's surface. A young black man in his best shirt and tie, carrying a folder that contained copies of his resume, his programming certificates from community college, and letters of recommendation from instructors who had seen past his conviction record to the student who stayed after class to ask questions and debug code until the janitors kicked him out. The cold he had caught in the rain had settled in his chest, making his breathing slightly labored. But the fever had broken yesterday morning. He had almost called to reschedule the interview, but opportunities like this were rarer than snow in July for someone with his background. Vail Corporation was looking for junior developers, and somehow, against all odds, his application had made it through the initial screening. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and chrome, designed to make visitors feel the weight of corporate success. Abstract sculptures that probably cost more than Alex made in a year stood like sentinels between clusters of leather furniture, where people waited with the patient confidence of those who were expected. Alex approached the reception desk where a young woman with perfect makeup and a practiced smile looked up from her computer screen. "I'm here for the 2 o'clock interview," he said, his voice slightly hoarse from the lingering cold. Alex Carter. She scrolled through her list, her manicured finger tracing down names until she found his. For just a moment, her professional smile flickered, and Alex caught the subtle tightening around her eyes. She had seen his background, knew what the letters after his name meant in the company database. 23rd floor, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Elevator Bank C. The elevator was packed with people who wore their success like expensive cologne. Hay spoke in acronyms about deals and markets, their voices carrying the casual authority of those who had never had to explain themselves or justify their presence in spaces like this. Alex stood in the corner, folder pressed against his chest, trying to make himself invisible while the floors ticked by. The 23 RD floor waiting area looked like a spread from a business magazine. Leather chairs were arranged around glass tables that reflected the city skyline, and magazines with titles like Executive Excellence and Innovation Quarterly fanned out with geometric precision. The other candidates sat scattered around the room, most of them young white men with university rings and the relaxed posture of people who had never doubted their place in the world. Alex chose a seat by the window and tried to calm his breathing. Through the glass, Chicago spread out below him like a map of dreams and broken promises. Neighborhoods rising and falling in waves of gentrification and decay. Millions of people trying to make their lives mean something in a city that could be beautiful and cruel in the same breath. Alex Carter, a woman in a charcoal business suit said, appearing beside his chair. She was Asian, maybe 40, with precise movements that suggested military training or years in corporate litigation. I'm Margaret Chen, Vice President of Human Resources. Ready? The conference room felt like an interrogation chamber from a legal drama. 3 people sat on one side of a polished table that could have doubled as a landing strip. Margaret Chen, a middle-aged man who introduced himself as David Morrison from Information Technology, and a woman with silver hair pulled back in a style that spoke of old money and older power. Her nameplate read, Eleanor Westbrook, Chief Operating Officer. The first questions came easy, the kind Alex had practiced in front of his bathroom mirror. He talked about his programming courses, the projects he had completed on his ancient laptop, the apps he had built that nobody would ever download, but that had taught him the discipline of turning ideas into code. David Morrison nodded along, asking follow-up questions about specific languages and frameworks that suggested genuine interest in Alex's technical abilities. For 20 minutes, Alex almost forgot who he was supposed to be in this room. He was just another candidate discussing algorithms and database architecture with people who understood the beauty of elegant code. But then Margaret Chen opened a different folder, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Alex, she said, her voice professional but her eyes harder. I need to ask you about something that came up in your background. Check. Alex's chest tightened. He had known this moment would come, had rehearsed his response 100 times, but knowing didn't make it easier. The air in the room seemed to thicken, and he could feel Eleanor Westbrook's eyes studying him with new intensity. You were convicted of armed robbery 7 years ago, Margaret continued, reading from the file like she was announcing the weather. You served 3 years in Stateville Correctional Center. This is a serious crime, Alex. Armed robbery. Suggests violence, poor judgment, disregard for other people's safety. The words hit him like physical blows. Alex forced himself to meet her eyes, though every instinct screamed at him to look down, to make himself smaller, to apologize for existing. Yes, ma'am. That's all correct. David Morrison leaned back in his chair, his earlier enthusiasm cooling like coffee left on a desk. That's not just a youthful mistake, Alex. Armed robbery. That means you threatened someone with a weapon. You terrified some innocent person just trying to do their job. I know. Alex's voice was steady, though his heart was hammering against his ribs hard enough to make his vision blur. I robbed a convenience store when I was 20. I used a gun. I threatened the... Alex continued. I threatened the clerk, took $237 from the register, and got arrested in the parking lot because my car wouldn't start. The silence in the room was deafening. He could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic 23 floors below, the scratch of Margaret Chen's pen against paper as she made notes that would probably end his chances before he had finished speaking. Why? Eleanor Westbrook spoke for the first time since the introductions. her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Alex looked at her, surprised by the directness of the question. Most people wanted to skip over the crime itself to focus on rehabilitation and second chances without acknowledging the actual harm that had been done. "My mother was sick," he said. "Cancer. She needed treatment, and we didn't have insurance. I was working 2 jobs, but it wasn't enough. The bills kept coming, and I watched her get worse every day because we couldn't afford the medications she needed." He paused, remembering the weight of the gun in his hand, the way the clerk's eyes had widened with terror, the sound of his own voice demanding money from someone who probably made minimum wage and had problems of his own. "I'm not making excuses," Alex continued. "There were other options. I could have applied for assistance programs, could have talked to social workers, could have asked for help from community organizations, but I was 20 years old and scared and angry. And I thought I could fix everything with one stupid decision." David Morrison was shaking his head, his face set in lines of disapproval. "But you chose violence. You chose to traumatize another person to solve your problems." "I did." Alex didn't flinch from the accusation. "And I've spent every day since then trying to figure out how to live with that choice." Margaret Chen looked up from her notes. "Tell us about prison." Another surprise. Most interviewers wanted to skip over the incarceration to fast forward to rehabilitation and fresh starts, but these 3 seemed determined to examine every ugly corner of his story. "I learned who I really was," Alex said, "not who I thought I was or who I wanted to be, but who I actually was. When everything got stripped away, I got my GED in year 1, started taking college courses through the prison education program. In year 2, learned to code on an old computer in the library that crashed every 20 minutes, but still worked well enough to teach me the basics." Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "And after your release?" "I've been working at Tony's Diner for 2 years, saving money for programming courses at City College. I volunteer at the community center on Saturdays, teaching kids basics, computer skills. I've never been arrested again, never even got a speeding ticket. I see a counselor once a month, not because I have to anymore, but because it helps me stay focused on who I want to become." The room fell silent again. Alex could feel them weighing him, measuring his words against their fears, trying to calculate the risk of giving someone like him a chance. He understood their hesitation. In their position, he might have made the same calculations. "Alex," Eleanor said, "we have other qualified candidates, people with similar technical skills but without criminal records. Why should we choose you over them?" The question he had been dreading and preparing for in equal measure. Alex took a breath, tasting the recycled air of the conference room, feeling the weight of his entire future balanced on whatever words came next. "Because I know what it means to lose everything," he said. "I know what it's like to have people look at you and see only your worst moment, to have doors close before you even get a chance to knock. That means I'll never take this opportunity for granted. I'll work harder than anyone else you interview, because I understand that second chances don't come around often." He met each of their eyes in turn, holding their gazes even as he felt exposed and vulnerable as a nerve ending. "I can't change what I did 7 years ago. I can't undo the harm I caused or erase the fear I put in that clerk's eyes, but I can control what I do with the rest of my life. And if you give me this chance, I swear to you that you'll never regret it." Margaret Chen closed the folder, with a soft snap that sounded like a gavel falling. "We have several more interviews scheduled. We'll be in touch by Friday." Alex stood, shook hands with each of them, and walked out of the conference room with his dignity intact and his hopes hanging by threads. In the elevator, surrounded by successful people who had never had to explain themselves, he pressed the button for the lobby and tried not to think about how many more applications he would have to fill out before someone said yes. Lilignari. Westbrook remained in the conference room long after Alex Carter had left, staring at his resume while Margaret and David discussed the remaining candidates. "Obviously, we can't hire him," David was saying, his voice carrying the certainty of someone who had never had to question his place in the world. The liability exposure alone would be staggering. What if he relapses? What if he steals client information? What if he becomes violent with co-workers? Margaret nodded, though her expression was more thoughtful. His technical skills are impressive. The projects he showed us were actually more sophisticated than some of the university graduates we've interviewed. But you're right about the risk. Eleanor barely heard them. She kept thinking about Alex's eyes when he talked about his mother, the way his voice had remained steady even as he described the worst moment of his life. There was something about his composure, his refusal to look away from hard truths, that reminded her of someone. "We'll send the standard rejection letter." Eleanor set down her wine glass with trembling fingers. The man they had interviewed that day, the ex-convict they were preparing to reject, was the same man who had once shown her kindness when she was nothing more than an elderly woman stranded in a storm. He had no idea who she was, had expected nothing in return, and had simply helped because he saw someone in need. She thought of the questions they had asked him, of David's closed expression when his conviction was mentioned, of Alex sitting there defending choices he had made as a scared young man, asking only for a chance to prove people could change. The next morning, Eleanor called Margaret without preamble. "I've made a decision about the Carter interview," she said. Margaret's voice was carefully neutral as she replied, "I've drafted the rejection letter. David wanted me to mention that we found 2 other candidates with similar technical skills, but cleaner backgrounds." Eleanor's answer was calm but firm. "We're hiring him." Silence followed, long enough for Eleanor to hear the gurgle of Margaret's coffee machine and the distant traffic. When Margaret voiced concerns about reputation and risk, Eleanor cut her off. "Yes, that's why they pay me to make these decisions. He'll be on 6 months probation, with limited access until he proves himself. Full monitoring. But we're hiring him." When Margaret hesitated, Eleanor ended the discussion. "David can push all he wants. The decision is made." On his first day at Vail Corporation, Alex Carter felt like he had stepped onto a movie set, unsure whether he was cast as an extra or a villain. Margaret led him through orientation with brisk professionalism, introducing him to colleagues who smiled politely but whose eyes carried unspoken questions. His cubicle was small, his equipment outdated, and the nameplate read Alex Carter. Software developer, probationary. Words that felt branded onto his forehead. He unpacked his meager belongings. A coffee mug that read, "Progress Not Perfection," a photo of his mother, and a notebook for goals and reflections. Eyes followed him, whispers hushed when he turned. Secrets never lasted long in office buildings. His first assignment was debugging a glitch in the customer portal. Grateful for something tangible, Alex immersed himself in the code, discovering, after hours of analysis, a rare race condition. When he submitted the fix with thorough documentation, Sarah, his team lead, looked genuinely impressed. "You found it already? Tom spent 3 days on this last week." Alex shrugged. "Sometimes a fresh perspective helps." He didn't add that most of his experience came from fixing the prison library's failing computer system. Over the next weeks, he built a rhythm, arriving early, staying late, and producing clean, well-documented code. His contributions were solid, Yet the unspoken distance remained. It all came to a head in his fourth week, when Tom raised his hand during a meeting and, with deliberate emphasis, questioned whether someone with Alex's past should have access to client data. The room went silent. Heat surged in Alex's chest. But instead of shrinking, he stood. Calmly, he acknowledged his crime, his prison sentence, and the years of reflection that had followed. If you think I'd risk this job, this opportunity, by doing something reckless, then you fundamentally misunderstand what this means to me. I'm not the same person I was at 20. If you can't see past my record, that's your limitation, not mine. He sat back down, steady despite his racing heart. Dot. The room shifted. Afterward, co-workers approached him quietly. Jennifer from QA told him, "That took guts." Mike from the database team said, "Your code is cleaner than most. Grads we get. Actions speak louder than background checks." And as the office emptied, Sarah appeared at his desk with 2 cups of coffee. Sitting without preamble, she shared her brother's struggles with addiction, arrests, and eventual recovery. "People like Tom see the past as permanent," she said softly. "They can't imagine someone becoming better because of their mistakes, not in spite of them. What you did today, standing up without anger, that mattered." Sarah's words lingered in Alex's mind. "Standing up for yourself without getting defensive or angry showed me something about your character. The Alex Carter who robbed that store might not have been able to do that." She finished her coffee and stood, then paused at the entrance to his cubicle. "Tomorrow we start the Henderson Project. It's complex, high profile, and Tom's been angling to lead it for months. I'm putting you in charge instead." The Henderson Project was exactly as Sarah had promised. Demanding, high stakes, and the kind of assignment that could define a career. The client, a mid-sized financial services firm, needed its customer management system rebuilt from scratch, with integration requirements as dense as a computer science textbook and a deadline that seemed impossible. Alex threw himself into the work with relentless focus. He arrived before the security guards and left after the cleaning crew, filling whiteboards with diagrams he photographed and studied at home, writing code with the precision of a watchmaker and the intensity of an artist. Tom's resentment grew more obvious by the day. He questioned Alex's technical choices in meetings, copied management on emails expressing doubts about deadlines, and made pointed remarks about entrusting critical systems to someone with Alex's background. But the results spoke louder than words. Alex's code was clean and efficient, his documentation meticulous, and even David Morrison, who had once opposed his hiring, was impressed. When a critical integration failed 2 weeks before the deadline, it was Alex who stayed all night, tracing thousands of lines until he uncovered a single misplaced comma that had brought the system down. Another breakthrough came after days of frustration, when Alex realized the failures followed a hidden logic. Within hours, he designed an elegant fix, and the next morning, the system ran flawlessly. For the first time, the Henderson Project seemed destined to succeed. That afternoon, Sarah appeared at his desk. "The client wants a demo next week. They've heard good things. Also, Eleanor Westbrook wants to see you in her office." The executive floor felt like another world. Marble floors, original artwork, and hushed silence. Eleanor's corner office overlooked the city, furnished with antiques worth more than Alex's yearly salary. She gestured for him to sit. "The Henderson Project is going well," she said, not asking but stating. "Sarah tells me you've been working 18-hour days, that you solved a problem the whole team struggled with." "It was a team effort," Alex replied automatically. "Was it?" She opened a folder. "Tom Morrison sent me an email. He questioned your suitability for leadership roles, suggested we were taking risks by putting someone with your background. In charge, Alex braced himself. Miss Westbrook, if you're reconsidering, I'm not. Her voice cut him off, steady and sharp. She rose and walked to the window. 3 weeks ago, I was caught in a storm. My umbrella broke. My driver was late. A young man gave me his jacket, stood in the rain so I could stay dry, helped me onto the bus. He didn't know who I was or expect anything in return. He just helped. She turned, eyes locked on his. That was you, wasn't it? Alex nodded, unable to speak. I hired you because of that moment, she said. Not despite your record, but because of who you revealed yourself to be when you thought no one was watching. Character isn't what you do in the spotlight, it's what you do when you believe no one will remember. She opened another folder, this one thick with documents. Your probationary period is over. Effective immediately, you're promoted to senior developer with full clearance and a salary increase. Alex stared at the papers, hardly believing. There's more, Eleanor continued. We're launching a second chance program, recruiting candidates with records who've proven rehabilitation and skill. I want you to help design the program, conduct interviews, mentor new hires. Miss Westbrook, I don't know what to say. Say you'll do it justice. 6 months later, Alex sat on the opposite side of the same conference table where he had once defended his own past. Across from him sat Maria Santos, 26, recently released after serving time for financial fraud. Her resume carried a gap, but her portfolio was strong, and her eyes held the same mix of fear and hope Alex remembered all too well. Tell me about your experience with database design, he asked gently, his voice warm with understanding. As she answered with growing confidence, Alex thought about the chain of small choices that had led here. A jacket offered in the rain, an interview that could have ended in rejection, and the decision to see potential instead of failure. The Second Chance program had already brought in 8 employees in its first year. 8 people who might have been discarded elsewhere, now proving that redemption was not just possible but transformative. And in that conference room high above, the city. Alex Carter knew he was helping to build more than software. He was building a future where past mistakes didn't erase present possibilities.